All right, good afternoon, guys. Today we will be learning about cells and the basic units of life. So when we think about basic units of life and we think about the word life, life means living and things that are living or all living things. And all of these living things are basically cells, okay? Cells are the basic units of life, meaning that without a cell, you will not have life. So, Robert Hooke, a scientist, he looked at a thin slice of cork and he saw that the cork looked like little boxes. So he called them cells. The word cell in Latin means little rooms. So, just like we can compare it to a jail, and in the jail, you have different cells, okay? You have little rooms that hold things or hold people, basically, and they're all clustered together on a hallway. It's kind of like somewhat similar to the same thing as what Robert Hooke saw on this little cork. And when we say he looked at a slice of cork, he saw the slice of cork on a microscope, and the microscope showed these little holes that provided him information that it was cells. So when we ask the question and we say, well, how big is a cell? How big is a cell? So I want us to look at this little simulation right here, and it is a needle head. The guy's holding a needle head. You have the needle and the head. So we have all of these different items here, which are all things that are living things, which we have human hair, dust mite, ragweed, pollen, olymphocyte, red blood cells, Baker yeast, E. coli, staphylococcus, Ebola virus, and also the rhinovirus. So if we're looking at this and we want to look at the top of the head of this needle and we want to see how big the hair is, we'll magnify it. So let's magnify it. And then this is about 2 millimeters and magnification. So we can actually see one strand of hair on 2 millimeters. Well, let's go ahead and magnify it some more. Look in a little bit more deeper. So if we look in deeper now, look how this is a dust mite. Dust mite is very, very, very small. So now we are really looking in. Well, let's go in deeper, like if we're magnifying it even more. And so now we have all of these different little clusters of different things that we have here, which is we have the ragweed pollen, okay? And that's how small a piece of pollen is. When people are allergic to pollen and it goes up in their nose and we sneeze, that little piece of pollen is that small, one little item of pollen. And then we think about it, cells, this one pollen is made up of many, many, many cells. So the many, many cells, can you imagine how even small one cell would be to make up this right here? Let's look at a lymphocyte. This is a lymphocyte, okay? One lymphocyte is made up of many, many, many cells, okay? So that's how small that is. We look at the red blood cell, and then we look at the Baker's yeast, okay? Well, let's even go deeper, magnifying it even deeper. E. coli. See how small E. coli is? Staphylococcus. Then we have the Ebola virus. The Ebola virus, now look how small the Ebola virus is. That one virus made up of many, 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 many cells, okay? Now, even if we magnify it, now Ebola virus we would think would be the smallest, right? Well, no, because if we magnify it even more, look at the rhinovirus. That's in nanometers. That's how small the virus, that little piece of thing is. And that is a living thing. And that one little living thing is made up of cells. And we're talking about not one cell, but we are talking about many, many, many cells. So I want that will give you a brief idea of basically what cells are, or what cells actually they look like. So on forward to how big the cell is. Now let's look at the cell theory. So when you think about a theory would be something that scientists basically have studied, and that they came up with, they studied it, they did their research, they did their experiments, and they came up with this kind of like rule of research that this is what it is. This is what a cell is. So you had two scientists. Well, I'm gonna just read the slide to you. It says all organisms are made of cells. The cell is the basic unit of life in all living things, and all cells come from existing cells. So you had this German scientist named Matthias Schindler, and he came up with the conclusion that all plant parts are made of cells. So he studied plants, and plants are considered living things. So if plants are considered living things, plants must be made up of cells. So another German scientist came up behind him, and he concluded that all animal parts are made up of cells. So just like with animals, even human beings, even people like us, we are all made up of cells. So they came up with this knowledge, and then they basically came up with the two parts of the cell theory, which is stated here today, that all organisms are made of cells, and that all cells is the basic unit of life in living things. So anything that is living has to come from a cell. And then it says here, last but not least, that all cells come from existing cells. So basically, you had two cells come together, reproduce to create another cell, and then those cells come together to recreate and produce more cells. So then you have cells creating more cells, till you have a whole cluster of cells that makes up who you are, either you, an animal, or even a plant that we see out in the environment. So there are two types of cells. You have a prokaryotic cell and you have a eukaryotic cell. And it says that all cells, whether they are prokaryotic or eukaryotic, have some common features. So if we look here, they have a plasma membrane, cytoplasm, DNA, a nucleoid region, a nucleus, and ribosome. So it doesn't matter whether it's a prokaryotic cell or a eukaryotic cell, they are going to have similar features in part. So now let's look at this. Organelles. It says that organelles are structures that enable the cell to live, grow, and reproduce. I want you to think about the human body. You are made up of heart, your lungs, your stomach, your liver, all of those different items that make you who you are. In order for you to be able to function, to breathe, to live, are considered organs. Well, just like a cell has to have organelles in order for it to function, in order for it to survive. So here we see one cell, and this one cell has all of these different parts that does something different. Just like with our heart sends blood through the body in order for us to, our circulation. And then we have lungs in order for us to breathe. Well, it's the same thing. These organelles have different functions in order for the cell to be able to live and survive. And they're called organelles. We have organs, the cell has organelles. So going back, we talked about two types of cells. We talked about the prokaryotic cell and the eukaryotic cell. So it says that the prokaryotic cell, they have no membrane covered nucleus. They have no membrane covered organelles. They have a circular DNA, and they are bacteria. So going back, I'm thinking about this and I'm saying, they are bacteria. So guys, when we think about bacteria, we think about as something bad, that it's not something that is really good, something that can make us sick, it can harm us, and cannot do us, make us, make us get scared about it. But I want you to think about this. There are some bacteria that is bad, and there are some bacteria that is really, really good. So for example, in the foods that we eat, like yogurt, cheese, and some dairy products, they all have good bacteria in it. Medicines, some medicines such as antibiotics that you take to kill other bacteria have those cells in them, or have bacterial cells in them, in order for it to work in a positive way. And when we look at some bacteria, there's some bacteria that also live in extreme conditions. And when we talk about that, and we're still talking about these bacteria, prokaryotic cells, they can live in the crust of ocean regions where it is very hot and gases are leaking out consistently. They are in the very bottom of the sea where pressure is so great that it will crush any living thing, and the temperature is very low, meaning that it is very, very cold. So you have bacteria that can live in very, very extreme environments, and then you have bacteria that can live in very, very, well, hot environments and very, very cold environments. And then going back to when we talk about no membrane covering the nucleus, we will get more in detail with that when I tell you guys what the different types of the organelles is, so it can come to you with, knowing about what the nucleus is. But it has no nucleus, no membrane covering the nucleus, and it has no membrane covering the organelles. And when we talk about membrane, we're talking about this covering or protective covering that protects the nucleus and protects the other organelles that's inside of it in order for it to live and survive. Okay, moving on. Now we talk about the eukaryotic cells. That was prokaryotic. These are eukaryotics. So the eukaryotics, they have a nucleus, they have a membrane covering organelles, they have linear DNA, and all other cells, and are all other cells. So just going back, and I want to flip for a minute. Here they have a circular DNA, meaning that their DNA inside of it is circular. It looks circular. And then when we look at the eukaryotic cells, they are linear. They are more so a little bit lined. So the eukaryotic cells are a little bit more complex than bacterial cells. So if you think about us, we are made up of eukaryotic cells. So you got your plants, you got your animals, you got fungi, you have protists, anything but bacteria. Anything but bacteria is made up of eukaryotic cells. And they have a cell wall and some do not. So some eukaryotic cells have a cell wall and some do not. So this is eukaryotic and prokaryotic cells.